Imagine this scenario, because I genuinely believe it is something absolutely everyone listening has lived through at some point. You reach a breaking point. You finally decide, with absolute unwavering certainty, that you're going to elevate your life.
Right. You're just totally done with the old way.
Exactly. You commit to a totally new path. Like maybe you're finally going to land that dream career, or perhaps you're ready to pursue a genuinely healthy romantic relationship after a whole history of toxic ones, or you just decide to completely transform your physical health.
So you map out the entire trajectory,
Mhm.
You buy the running shoes, you update the resume, you plan all your meals.
Yeah, you construct this beautiful, entirely logical architecture for your future. And you take those first few steps, and for a fleeting moment, everything feels totally aligned. You have all the momentum.
It feels great.
It does. But then, inexplicably, you find yourself completely retreating. You skip the essential morning routine. You pick an irrational fight with that phenomenal person who just entered your life.
You ignore the vital project that would secure your promotion, and instead you spend a vast constellation of hours just like scrolling on your phone.
Yes, the architectural clarity just completely shatters. And what replaces it is this profound, suffocating sense of frustration. It is entirely staggering because, you are sitting there perfectly aware of what you desire.
You know the exact actions you should be executing.
Right. Yet it feels as though this invisible, overpowering gravity is dragging you backward into the very life you are desperately trying to escape. And it feels entirely out of your conscious control.
Well, and naturally, that lack of control ushers in an endless tide of self-blame. You sit in the wreckage of your own plans and think, I'm just lazy, or I lack discipline.
Or I am fundamentally broken. That self-blame is just the universal human response.
It is, but it's also fundamentally incorrect.
Yeah.
We need to introduce a massive paradigm shift here. What you are experiencing, what feels like a catastrophic failure of willpower or a personality defect, is not a lack of discipline at all.
Wait, it's not, because it certainly feels like a lack of discipline.
I know it does, but it's really an unseen mechanical collision. It is a clash of existing and emerging frameworks. So self-sabotage, in its purest essence, is just the violent intersection of two competing realities.
Violent interception. Okay, I like that phrasing.
Yeah, the existence you are attempting to materialize is being actively, aggressively corrupted by the dominant momentum of your current reality.
I want to stop right there for a second, because framing self-sabotage not as a moral failing, but as a mechanical collision, that completely changes how we view failure.
It absolutely does. It takes the shame out of it.
Right, totally. So today's discussion pulls from a fascinating stack of behavioral frameworks, evolutionary psychology, and energetic philosophy to answer one incredibly frustrating question. Why do we systematically destroy the exact things we want the most?
It's the ultimate human puzzle.
It really is. So our mission today is to completely map out this phenomenon. We're going to uncover the hidden mechanics of this invisible resistance, dissect exactly why it feels so intensely personal, and outline a robust, actionable path to outsmarting this destructive cycle once and for all. So, where do we even begin to untangle this?
Well, we have to start by completely abandoning the idea that your current circumstances are passive. We tend to view our current life, our daily routines, our financial struggles, our recurring relationship issues, as a static room we're merely sitting inside.
Like it's just a backdrop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We logically assume that to change our lives, we just need to stand up and walk out the door of that room. But your current reality is not a passive environment. It is an active, self-sustaining ecosystem. It has real momentum.
Okay, when you say it's an active ecosystem with momentum, I want to make sure we ground this. We aren't talking about something mystical here, right? We're talking about the way a life builds physical and psychological mass over time.
Precisely. Let's examine the concept of thought forms, but through the lens of how the brain actually operates. The human mind is just this ceaseless engine of creation. A passing thought on its own is relatively harmless. It has minimal weight.
Sure, we have thousands of those a day.
Right. But a phenomenon occurs when a thought is infused with powerful emotional energy and then repeated continuously over the passage of eras.
The passage of eras, meaning just a massive span of time, day in and day out.
Yeah, exactly. When mental repetition perfectly intertwines with intense emotional weight like chronic frustration, deep sorrow, or perpetual victimhood, that energy crystallizes.
It solidifies into a permanent structure. It stops being a fleeting idea and becomes the default setting. It's like carving a canyon.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like a solitary drop of water running over a rock does absolute nothing. But if you have a rushing river of water representing that intense emotional energy flowing over that exact same path continuously, it eventually carves a massive gorge.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize neuroplasticity and emotional habituation. The repetition carves the gorge.
And once that gorge is carved, any new water that falls into the area is naturally forcibly funneled right into that same old trench.
Right, exactly. And as these crystallized patterns build upon each other, compounding over a vast expanse of time, this repeated energy eventually gives birth to what philosophical frameworks call a blind intelligence.
A blind intelligence.
Yeah. It becomes an entity in its own right. It functions as a shadow doppelganger of the individual who created it.
Wait, a shadow doppelganger? That sounds like something out of a supernatural thriller. Are we talking about a literal ghost hovering over our shoulders, or is this like a metaphor for a deeply ingrained psychological reflex? I just want to make sure we don't lose the skeptics listening right now.
No, it is absolutely a metaphor for a profoundly real biological and psychological mechanism. Think of it as the brain's default mode network combined with your oldest survival reflexes.
Okay, so the brain's autopilot.
Exactly. When a pattern of thinking and feeling is repeated enough, your brain automates it to save energy. It delegates that behavior to the subconscious. Because this automated system operates entirely below your conscious awareness, and because it violently defends its own existence to maintain efficiency, it feels exactly like a separate entity.
I see, so it acts with a blind intelligence.
All right.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So if my current reality is filled with financial struggle, let's say, and I constantly tell myself, I am perpetually broke, nothing ever works out for me, I have fused mental repetition with the heavy emotion of despair.
Exactly.
So over time, that specific cocktail birthed an automated subconscious program, this blind intelligence, whose entire structural composition is just the essence of nothing works out for me.
Yes. And here's the crucial realization. This invisible system does not possess a moral compass. It does not harbor malice, spite, or hatred toward you.
It's not out to get you.
No, it doesn't want you to be miserable. It is entirely neutral. Its sole universal directive, its prime directive, is simply to exist. That is it. It just wants to maintain the specific emotional baseline that birthed it.
So it's essentially just experiencing the biological drive for survival. It's trying to maintain homeostasis, even if that homeostasis is absolute misery.
Exactly. If you gave birth to a subconscious baseline composed of a why me victim mentality, its only purpose is to ensure that the baseline of why me continues uninterrupted.
And how does it do that?
By swaying the conditions of your perception and actions so that you continue to experience situations that make you say, why me? It feeds on the resonance of its origin.
But if this system is just blindly maintaining homeostasis, why does the resistance feel so incredibly targeted? Like when I try to change my diet or launch a business and I suddenly feel paralyzed by an overwhelming, suffocating dread, it feels personal. It feels like my own brain is actively attacking me.
It feels like an attack because, from the perspective of that subconscious baseline, you are initiating a lethal threat.
A lethal threat, just by eating a salad instead of a burger.
To the baseline, yes. When you attempt to adopt a new pattern, a pattern of empowerment, success, or deep love, your old reality feels its very existence being dismantled. It feels itself evaporating.
Wow. Because you are no longer generating the specific emotional food it needs to survive.
Exactly. So it defends its life the only way it knows how.
Which explains the sheer violence of self-sabotage. It isn't a glitch. It is the system working perfectly to protect itself.
Perfectly.
And that sets the stage for the initial immense obstacle we face when trying to outsmart this cycle, the illusion and projection of fear.
Yes. The initial major barrier to your elevation is a masterful psychological chess game. As you begin to elevate, as you stop reacting to the coworkers who usually anger you, as you start practicing stillness, as you begin investing your resources instead of squandering them, the old system registers this as a primal terror.
Right, because it is literally facing its own obsolescence.
Because it is being starved of the old habits. Its survival hangs in the balance. But because this system is tethered to you, because it lives in the architecture of your own mind, it possesses a profound intimacy with your subconscious.
It knows all your buttons.
Oh, it knows them all. It cannot physically reach out and grab your arm to stop you from working out. So it resorts to psychological manipulation. It takes the intense primal terror it is experiencing regarding its own dissolution, and it forcefully projects that terror onto your conscious awareness.
So it takes its own fear of dying and makes me think I am the one in danger.
Yes, and this is where the grand illusion takes place. It tricks your mind into associating the forward momentum, the success, the healing, the positive change with absolute catastrophic danger.
That is incredibly insidious. I love the analogy of a psychological thermostat. It's like, imagine you have lived your entire life in a room set to a freezing temperature. Your body, your clothes, your expectations, they are all calibrated to the cold. Then you decide you want to be warm. You walk over to the thermostat and crank it up to a comfortable heat. The moment the room starts to warm up, the internal machinery panics. It recognizes a deviation from the baseline. So the air conditioning violently kicks into overdrive to freeze the room back down, purely to maintain what it considers normal.
Right, the system fights the change.
And in doing so, it convinces you that the warmth was actually a fire that was going to burn the house down.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanics. The warmth is objectively safe, but the system's reaction has convinced you it is lethal. Consequently, your subconscious mind, whose primary evolutionary function is to keep you alive and avoid pain, registers this projected panic as an authentic threat.
And your conscious mind doesn't pause to analyze the fear to see if it makes logical sense, right? It just feels the visceral terror flooding your nervous system.
Exactly. So what does it do? It begins to avoid this success entirely.
It executes self-sabotage as a protective measure. It basically pulls the fire alarm.
It pulls the fire alarm. Self-sabotage is not you trying to ruin your life. It is your mind desperately trying to keep you safe from the overwhelming fear that has been artificially linked to your growth. You begin to feel inexplicably uncomfortable, agitated, or exhausted whenever you sit down to work on your desired reality.
Because you associate the new behavior with an impending disaster.
Yes.
And because humans are biologically wired to avoid pain, you simply stop doing the things that make you feel that way. You stop writing the manuscript, you stop going to the gym, you cancel the date. And the absolute tragedy is that the moment you retreat, the fear instantly dissipates. The internal alarm turns off.
And you feel a massive wave of relief.
Exactly. Which reinforces the false belief that you did the right thing by quitting. You are back in the familiar, stagnant comfort zone, and the old baseline survives another day.
And the labyrinth deepens further because of a foundational mechanic of perception, the magnification of focus. The brain operates as a flawless magnifying glass. The psychological framework, known as the reticular activating system, or RAS, acts as a filter between your conscious mind and the world.
Right, the RAS. It filters out the overwhelming noise of reality and only lets in information that matches your current internal state.
Exactly.
So when I accept this projected fear as my own reality,
The moment you internalize that projected fear, the moment you claim it and declare, "I'm afraid this is dangerous," your RAS responds with absolute compliance. It mirrors that frequency of fear and magnifies it.
wow.
It begins scanning your environment, bringing forth circumstances, passing comments, and minor events that justify, amplify, and validate that exact dread.
It effectively proves you right. If you internalize the fear of starting a new enterprise, suddenly a minor software glitch feels like a catastrophic omen.
Yeah. Or a completely neutral comment from a peer feels like a profound intentional betrayal. Your brain orchestrates a symphony of perceived disasters to match the fear you are holding.
And then you look at these magnified events and say, see, I knew it was a terrible idea to try and change.
You fall right into the trap. You retreat, believing the external world is telling you to stop, when in reality, your own perceptual filter is just magnifying the fear your old baseline projected onto you. It's a masterful, invisible prison.
So how do we dismantle this? Because knowing that the brain is projecting fear and filtering reality to validate that fear is absolutely fascinating. But how does a person actually use that knowledge in the moment? Like when my chest is tight and I am terrified to hit publish on my work, how do I transmute that energy?
The foundational key to dismantling this illusion is profound, active awareness. You must recognize in the exact moment the dread washes over you that the fear does not actually belong to you.
Okay, so it's a detachment.
Exactly. When you sit down to work on your ultimate vision and the panic hits, you must pause, take a breath, and mentally or verbally declare, "This is not my fear. This is simply the mechanical panic of the old system dissolving."
It sounds so simple, but by explicitly labeling it, you detach it from your core identity. You shift from the subjective experience of I am terrified to the objective observation of I am witnessing my nervous system experience fear. You create distance.
That distance is everything. Recognizing that the fear is a mechanical reaction isolates it. Once it is isolated, it loses its hypnotic, paralyzing power over your actions. You are no longer under the illusion that the warmth is a deadly fire.
Right.
However, awareness alone is merely the first half of the equation. Once the fear is isolated and observed, you must execute a deliberate transmutation of that energy. You must shift your concentration toward the exact polarity of fear.
Meaning we have to shift toward courage. But how do we actually do that? Because telling someone who is terrified to just be brave is usually entirely useless advice.
It is entirely useless because we profoundly misunderstand what courage actually is. We treat fear and courage as if they are entirely different elements, like water and oil. But energetically and biologically, they're the exact same raw material.
Wait, I really want to emphasize this. Fear and courage are the exact same substance. The heart racing, the sweaty palms, the hyperfocus. That is the same hardware running both programs.
They are two ends of the identical spectrum. Consider temperature. Hot and cold are not different elements. They are identical in nature. They are both measurements of thermal energy, just at different rates of vibration.
Okay, I'm following you.
Similarly, fear and courage are both measurements of anticipation. Fear is the intense concentration on the anticipation of pain and failure. Courage, or excitement, is the intense concentration on the anticipation of triumph, despite the presence of uncertainty.
So moving from fear to courage isn't about finding a magical switch to turn off your nervous system. It's about taking the massive surge of energy that the fear is providing and consciously changing the direction it is pointing.
Precisely. You alter the polarity through intense, unrelenting concentration. Your state of being is entirely dependent upon where you place your visual and mental focus. If you are trapped in the illusion, you are concentrating entirely on everything that could go wrong.
You are vividly imagining the public embarrassment, the financial ruin, the rejection.
Exactly. To shift to courage, you must aggressively force your concentration onto the magnificent reality you are stepping into. You must lock your vision onto the desired outcome, acknowledging that your hands are shaking, acknowledging the trembling of the old baseline, but physically taking the step forward anyway.
You essentially march straight into the perceived fire, realizing as you walk through it that it is entirely an optical illusion. It has no heat. It cannot burn you.
That is the ultimate triumph over the internal resistance. You starve the old system of the retreat it desperately wants, and you fuel your new reality with the transmuted energy of action.
But as empowering as that internal victory is, it immediately brings us face to face with the external battlefield. Because while your internal biology is fighting to keep you the same, it isn't the only force at play.
Right, because the moment you defeat the internal shadow and actually start changing your life, you immediately slam into the resistance of the external world, your relationships, your environment, your culture.
Which brings us to the subsequent barrier, the overpowering gravity of the collective hive mind.
This is often where the journey of transformation transitions from a private struggle into a profoundly solitary and sometimes deeply painful social reality. The second barrier to your elevation is rooted incredibly deep within our evolutionary biology. It is the profound, hardwired terror of losing one's social circle or tribe due to the absolute necessity of change.
Let's explore that evolutionary psychology, because it is so easy to forget that our brains are essentially ancient, prehistoric hardware trying to operate in a modern, hyper-connected world.
We have to look back to the distant past to understand why social pressure feels like a life-or-death scenario. In the dawn of the human cycle, early hominins relied entirely, unreservedly, on the collective group for survival.
Right, the environment was an unforgiving landscape filled with predators, scarcity, and environmental hazards. A solitary human was, without exception, a dead human.
None whatsoever. There was absolutely no concept of rugged individualism on the prehistoric savanna. You were part of the collective or you were prey. Conformity to the group's behaviors and norms equated to approval from the group.
And approval from the group equated to continued access to food, shelter, and protection.
Exactly. If you strayed from the collective behaviors, if you demonstrated extreme individuality or unpredictability that threatened the cohesion of the tribe, you faced exile, and exile was a guaranteed brutal death sentence.
So conformity literally equals life, and individuality literally equals death, as far as our oldest brain structures are concerned.
That is the exact binary code written into the oldest parts of the human brain. It interprets the social world entirely through the lens of sheer survival. Now bring that ancient hardware into the present moment. You decide you want to manifest a magnificent new reality. The fundamental requirement of materializing a new reality is change.
You must abandon the old behaviors, the old coping mechanisms, the old complaints, and adopt entirely new ones.
You have to fundamentally break conformity with who you used to be and often who the people around you still are. You have to shatter conformity. And the moment you do, your primitive brain sounds a massive existential alarm.
It panics.
It looks at your new, elevated habits like waking up early to study while your friends are sleeping off a hangover and screams, "If we keep doing this, we will be entirely alienated from our current group, we will be exiled, and we will die."
It interprets your pursuit of excellence as an imminent physical threat. It's unbelievable when you frame it that way. You are literally just trying to eat a healthier diet or save money, and your brain genuinely thinks you are wandering alone into a blizzard to be eaten by wolves.
And that is merely the internal biological mechanism. We must scale this up to understand the full, sweeping scope of this resistance, because this evolutionary fear of change is not just isolated to your individual brain, it echoes out and forms a societal and universal mechanism of social regulation, a collective hive mind.
A universal hive mind. Let's unpack that, because again, I want to avoid sounding like we are talking about a sci-fi collective consciousness. How does this hive mind actually operate in daily life?
Think of it as a profound system of social homeostasis. Human societies, much like the biological systems they mirror, demand a state of energetic equilibrium. The status quo is not just a vague cultural concept, it is an active mandate of the collective.
So it's about keeping things predictable.
Exactly. This social hive mind craves predictability, endless repetition, and keeping everyone calibrated at a very similar emotional and behavioral frequency.
Because uniformity is predictable, and predictability to the collective feels safe. If everyone is complaining about the same things, watching the same things, and behaving the exact same way, no one has to expend energy dealing with the unknown.
Right. When everyone operates at the agreed-upon baseline, the social system functions with minimal disruption. But when you make the radical decision to elevate, when you decide to amass significant resources or cultivate profound internal peace or achieve extraordinary physical health, you suddenly become an anomaly.
You are an unpredictable variable disrupting the flat line of the status quo. You are poking your head above the crowd. You are making waves.
And the universal hive mind possesses a singular, ruthless mechanism for dealing with anomalies. It acts like a giant, invisible hammer, attempting to pound you back down into alignment with the rest of the collective.
I have to interject here because this brings up a very painful friction point that almost everyone who has tried to improve their life has encountered. When we try to elevate, the people who push back the hardest, the people who seem to actively resent our progress, are often our closest friends and our family.
Yes, the people closest to
The
us.
people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. So are my friends actively, maliciously trying to sabotage my success? Or are they just acting as mouthpieces for this social equilibrium?
It is almost never malicious, and recognizing that is vital for your own peace of mind. That is the tragedy of the situation. Your friends and family are acting entirely unconsciously. They are, as you eloquently put it, serving as the unwitting mouthpieces for the preservation of the status quo.
They are operating under the influence of their own evolutionary fear of change.
Precisely. So when they see me changing my habits, it doesn't inspire them. It triggers their primitive survival alarms. Your elevation forces them to confront their own stagnation. When you stop drinking, or you start setting boundaries, your presence becomes a mirror reflecting their own unfulfilled potential. But rather than analyzing their own discomfort and choosing to elevate with you, the easiest way for their brain to restore comfort is to use social pressure to pull you back down. They will deploy subtle, undermining tactics.
Like what? Give me an example of how that hammer actually swings in casual conversation.
Well, if you start pursuing financial abundance and discipline, a relative might casually say, "Oh, look at you skipping family dinner to work. I guess you think you're better than us now." Or, if you decide to leave a chaotic, toxic social environment, your friends might say, "You've completely changed. You used to be so fun, we don't even recognize you anymore."
You've changed. Those two words are weaponized so frequently, and they carry a terrifying psychological weight.
They carry that weight because, to the human ego, being accused of changing by your tribe is often more terrifying than the threat of physical violence. It threatens a fundamental, devastating withdrawal of conditional love.
Conditional love, meaning I love you and you belong in this group, but only under the strict condition that you remain exactly as you are, dealing with the same problems I am dealing with, so that I never have to feel uncomfortable about my own life choices.
That is the invisible, unspoken contract of the hive mind. It masquerades as loyalty and love, but it is actually a profound mechanism of social control. And the fear of losing that conditional love, the fear of the social hammer, is what forces an overwhelming majority of humanity to voluntarily self-sabotage.
They reach a certain altitude of success, they look down, they see their social circle getting smaller, they feel the icy withdrawal of that conditional approval, and they deliberately plummet back down to the baseline just to feel the warm embrace of the group again.
They sacrifice the absolute totality of their ultimate potential on the altar of social conformity.
It's like a crab in a bucket pulling the escaping crab back down. But the escaping crab is actually volunteering to be pulled. They choose the familiarity of the cage over the isolation of the open sky. So what is the path forward? If our biology is screaming at us to conform, and our social circles are actively using emotional leverage to pull us back, how do we possibly outsmart this barrier?
The solution requires a monumental, often painful shift in perspective regarding the true nature of love and environment. You must cultivate a steel-clad internal resolve. The individual must become unapologetically willing to shed environments, social circles, and relationships that are strictly conditional upon them remaining stagnant.
That is a brutal truth to swallow. You are saying you have to be fully prepared to lose people you care about. How does someone grieve that loss while still moving forward?
You have to be entirely willing to let them go. But you temper the grief of that loss with a profound, liberating realization. If someone's love and support are contingent on your lack of growth, it is not true love. It is merely a trauma bond or a convenience.
That's a powerful distinction.
True love, in its highest expression, actively supports, challenges, and celebrates the realization of your ultimate potential. True love desires your continuous expansion, even if it means the dynamic of the relationship must fundamentally evolve.
So when you face the accusation of you've changed, instead of feeling a wave of shame and retreating, you have to mentally reframe it. You must interpret their discomfort as objective confirmation that your new habits are actually working. You have to view you've changed as the ultimate badge of honor.
Exactly. You rewrite the narrative of abandonment. You are no longer mourning the loss of the old tribe. You are actively creating a psychological vacuum. You are clearing the space for the emergence of a new reality, one populated by individuals, mentors, and peers who resonate with your elevated standard.
But shedding that external weight of societal conformity, stepping away from the crowd and standing alone, that requires an immense, almost unfathomable amount of internal strength. You cannot stand alone against the live mind if you don't trust yourself, which bridges our exploration perfectly to the final and undoubtedly most critical pillar of this entire architecture, the internal ceiling of self-worth.
Yes, we have navigated the internal phantom of projected fear, and we have waded through the external gravity of social conformity. But absolutely none of that matters if we do not completely dismantle this final obstacle.
Because it's the foundation of everything.
It really is, because this is the absolute, unbreakable governing law of reality creation. An individual can utilize every strategic framework in the world, they can optimize their routine, they can curate a perfect external environment, but they will never, ever materialize a reality that exceeds their internal level of self-worth.
Self-worth acts as the absolute non-negotiable ceiling.
It is the impenetrable barrier. It dictates the maximum altitude your life is allowed to reach before the system forces a crash.
So we desperately need to understand exactly what constructs this ceiling, because self-worth is a term that gets thrown around constantly in popular psychology, usually alongside advice like just love yourself. But you are framing it not as a fluffy emotion, but as a rigid mechanical cascade. How is the ceiling actually built?
It is a precise mechanical cascade of internal accounting.
Mm.
And it begins with the most foundational currency of the human psyche, self-trust.
Self-trust, okay.
Self-trust is the bedrock. From the accumulation of self-trust, we derive self-esteem. Self-esteem, in turn, governs our level of outward confidence. And that confidence is what ultimately dictates the absolute ceiling of our self-worth.
Okay, let's break down that psychological cascade step by step, starting at the very bottom. Self-trust. How is self-trust practically generated or utterly destroyed in our mundane daily lives?
Self-trust is strictly maintained by a profoundly simple yet mercilessly rigorous mechanism. Executing the actions you know deep within your core that you must perform and completely abstaining from the actions you know you must avoid. It is the ledger of your integrity with yourself.
It's the micro-promises we make to ourselves each and every day.
Exactly. It is rarely about grand, sweeping gestures or massive public victories. It is entirely about the quiet, unseen, mundane moments of discipline. When your alarm sounds in the dark of the morning and you know you promised yourself you would rise to build your vision, do you rise or do you surrender to the comfort of the blankets?
Right.
When you feel the familiar impulse to consume a toxic substance or send a message to a toxic ex-partner or eat food that degrades your energy, do you abstain or do you indulge for the cheap dopamine hit?
And each and every time we ignore our own inner guidance. Every time we hit the snooze button or send that text we know we shouldn't send or avoid the difficult conversation we know we need to have, we aren't just making a harmless mistake. We are essentially bankrupting our self-trust currency.
We are making a withdrawal from our own psychological bank account. You're actively depleting the account. And when an individual continuously ignores their own inner directives over the passage of eras, their self-trust plummets to absolute zero.
Because your subconscious mind is always watching you.
Always. When you cannot trust yourself to follow through on the smallest, most basic directives, your mind logically concludes that you are fundamentally unreliable.
And if my own brain believes I am fundamentally unreliable, my self-esteem collapses. Because I know I am a fraud.
Yes, because self-esteem is simply the reputation you hold with yourself. You cannot possess high self-esteem if your reputation with yourself is built on a crumbling foundation of broken promises and repeated betrayals of your own stated goals. You can project arrogance to the world, but your internal self-esteem will be non-existent.
And without self-esteem, genuine confidence is physically impossible.
Confidence vanishes. And confidence, energetically speaking, is the strength of the signal you broadcast to the world. It is your ability to command your reality. Without confidence, your actions are weak, hesitant, and easily overpowered by the friction of the old reality. And therefore, with a weak signal and no trust in your own abilities, your self-worth rests firmly on the floor.
This perfectly explains the mechanism of what you refer to as lowering reality. Let's visualize this. Let's say my desired reality, a thriving enterprise, a peaceful mind, an extraordinary partnership is vibrating at a massive intensity up above me. I want it desperately. But my actual self-worth, completely depleted by years of hitting the snooze button and breaking my micro-promises, is minimal. It's scraping the bottom.
Right, there's a huge gap there.
What happens in that collision between a high-level goal and low-level self-worth?
This is where self-sabotage manifests in its most devastating, tragic form. The world you experience is fundamentally a flawless reflection of your internal baseline. The system cannot bestow upon you a reality that you secretly believe you're unworthy or incapable of managing.
It just won't allow it.
No. If the desired reality is immense, but the self-worth is minimal, the system will actively collapse the external environment down to match the low internal self-worth.
It forces the external reality to match the internal belief. It demands equilibrium.
Yeah. It demands equilibrium at all costs. You will unconsciously orchestrate scenarios, sudden financial mismanagements, inexplicable relationship conflicts, sudden catastrophic losses of motivation that tear down the magnificent reality you are building. You will reduce it to the exact precise level of what you secretly, deep down, believe you actually deserve based on your profound lack of self-trust.
It is entirely logical when you look at it that way. It's like expecting the world to hand you the keys to a magnificent, highly complex aircraft when you haven't even proven to yourself that you can be trusted to safely steer a child's bicycle down an empty street.
That's a great analogy.
The world won't give you the aircraft, and more importantly, you won't let yourself fly the aircraft because you know with absolute certainty that you would instantly crash it. You have to master your own internal actions. You have to ride the bicycle with perfect discipline before you can master a larger external reality.
That is the exact mechanical truth. You cannot command a complex external reality if you cannot even command your own basic impulses. Self-mastery is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite to reality mastery.
So we find ourselves at the bottom of this psychological cascade. We realize our self-trust is depleted, our self-worth is minimal, and we are caught in a relentless cycle of self-sabotage. Telling someone to just start keeping your promises is daunting when the momentum of failure is so heavy. What is the ultimate remedy? How do we actually rebuild this foundation from scratch and align with a reality that matches our true potential?
The ultimate remedy to a collapsed sense of self-worth is entirely counterintuitive to everything the modern world preaches. The modern world tells you to hustle more, consume more information, seek more advice, take massive action. But the actual solution is radical stillness.
Radical stillness. Hold on. Not more action, not listening to more motivational talks, not building a more complex notion board, just stillness.
No, because your current actions are infected by the frantic, chaotic energy of low self-worth. You are acting out of desperation. To cure the infection, you must disconnect from the endless tide of external inputs.
We live in an era where human attention is perpetually fractured.
We really do. We are constantly seeking validation, distraction, and identity from external sources, screens, social media, the opinions of our peers. To rebuild self-worth, you must intentionally sever those tethers. You must spend deliberate, dedicated time in absolute internal silence.
Let's get very practical here. What does radical stillness actually look like? Are we talking about sitting cross-legged and chanting, or listening to a guided meditation recording?
No guides, no background music. Radical stillness is the physical act of sitting in an empty room, entirely alone, with absolute zero external stimuli. No phone, no journal, no inputs. You sit, and you observe the chaos of your own mind without reacting to it.
Which sounds agonizing, and it is exactly what the old subconscious baseline and the societal hive mind desperately want you to avoid.
They want you perpetually distracted, because distraction is how they maintain control. When you are distracted, you operate on autopilot. But in the silence, you begin to perceive the mechanical truth. When you enforce radical stillness, you deprive the default mode network of its usual escape routes. Your brain will scream for a dopamine hit.
It will project boredom, anxiety, and physical agitation.
But if you hold the line and remain still, you begin to observe those thought forms without identifying with them. You realize, I am hearing the thought that I am a failure, but I am not the failure itself.
You create that critical distance. You realize you are the sky, and the thoughts are just the weather passing through, and what happens physically and psychologically when we maintain that stillness.
Chemically, your cortisol levels begin to drop. Your nervous system shifts from the sympathetic fight or flight state into the parasympathetic rest and digest state. The manufactured panic of the old reality begins to lose its physiological grip. And most importantly, as the frantic demands of the ego quiet down, you align with your true nature.
Which is what exactly? If I am not my chaotic thoughts and I am not my old destructive habits, what is my true nature beneath all of that noise?
Your true nature is an expression of infinite potential. You are a localized manifestation of life itself. When you operate strictly from the traumatized ego, you perceive yourself as small, flawed, and fundamentally unworthy. You perceive yourself as a broken machine.
But when you touch that absolute stillness, you reconnect with the fundamental baseline of existence.
Yes, and an expression of life itself inherently possesses infinite self-worth. There is no ceiling. The ceiling is a manufactured illusion.
That is a staggering realization. In the absolute silence, stripped of all the external noise and the tribal expectations, you remember that you are not the sum of your broken micro-promises. You are the awareness observing them. And from that grounded place of infinite worth, you can finally build true, sustainable discipline.
Yes, because from that place of profound internal connection, discipline completely changes its polarity. It ceases to be a punishment. The modern world often views discipline negatively, as a restriction of freedom, a rigid cage of rules. But true discipline is the ultimate tool for liberation.
It's the daily, quiet act of keeping your promises to yourself, not out of self-hatred or a desperate need to fix yourself, but out of profound self-respect.
Discipline is the physical mechanism by which you honor the infinite worth you discovered in the stillness.
Discipline is just self-love translated into action. It is looking at the cheap dopamine hit and saying, I am simply too valuable to squander my potential on these lesser impulses. And as you execute that discipline, day after day, waking up when you said you would, doing the work, honoring the boundaries, you steadily rebuild the self-trust.
Which naturally elevates the self-esteem.
Which magnifies the confidence.
Which completely shatters the old artificial ceiling of self-worth.
And when that internal ceiling shatters, the magnificent reality you have been attempting to architect is no longer blocked by your own subconscious. It simply pours in because your internal baseline finally matches the external demand. The friction is gone.
Totally gone.
Having completely deconstructed the internal projection of fear, the external gravity of the social hive mind, and the absolute foundational requirement of building self-trust through radical stillness, we have mapped the entire territory. This brings us to a much broader synthesizing reflection on the true capacity of human potential.
It is a journey that reshapes our entire fundamental understanding of how reality operates.
It truly does. Because when we view the human experience through this specific mechanical lens, self-sabotage is no longer seen as a tragic flaw in our character. It isn't a permanent stain of weakness, and it isn't the universe punishing us. It is an incredibly powerful, entirely neutral mechanism of the mind, functioning exactly as it was designed to function.
It is the machinery of creation and preservation, operating flawlessly, merely executing the dominant commands and emotional baselines it has been given over the passage of eras.
Exactly. The old reality fights so incredibly hard against our elevation simply because the human mind is profoundly, staggeringly powerful at sustaining whatever reality it focuses on. Think about that. The fact that your subconscious mind can manufacture literal physical fear, filter your perception of the world to validate that fear, and subconsciously orchestrate your actions to keep you in the exact same place. That is actually proof of your own latent, awe-inspiring power. You engineered that defensive fortress. You just didn't realize you were doing it.
That is the ultimate liberating revelation. The sheer strength of your internal resistance is the exact measure of your creative power. It is your own power, currently weaponized against your growth due to old programming, merely waiting to be reclaimed, retrained, and redirected.
Which leaves us with a final expansive consideration, a thought for everyone listening to sit with in their own moments of radical stillness as they navigate their own internal architecture.
If the mind's ability to maintain an old, unwanted reality is powerful enough to generate intense physical dread, project paralyzing illusions, and manipulate your actions just to keep you exactly where you are, imagine the sheer, unstoppable magnitude of momentum that will occur once you build the unshakable self-trust required to make your new, desired reality the dominant baseline.
The very force that is currently holding you back, the massive gravitational pull, will become the exact wind propelling you forward. Once the scales tip, the system will defend your success just as fiercely as it defended your failure. What magnificent, unimaginable life are you fully capable of architecting once you finally realize that the intense, terrifying resistance you feel right now is just the echo of a ghost you have already outgrown?
You are simply waiting to realize that the door to the cage has always been wide open.
It brings us right back to the beginning. You step up to the drafting table, you lay out the blueprints for your new life, and suddenly you aren't fighting in the dark anymore. You understand the mechanics. You can see the resistance clearly. It is visible, it is categorized, and it is entirely within your power to transcend.
You hold the pen. You have always held the pen.
You hold the pen. Until next time.